look fantastic, Gary.
I don't know what you need brownie points for me anyway. Leah, give me a little signal when you think we've got everybody in, and we'll get her started.
I think we are ready to begin. It looks like we have almost everyone coming in.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today for our virtual clerks workshop. I am Gary Seacrest with KASB. I am in leadership services. I'm not going to introduce all of my colleagues, but we have a bunch of KASB folks in the background that are making sure that the technology is working for us, and I much appreciate that. We have 108 individuals that are pre-registered, so we once again wish to thank you for this. This is going to be a live session to start. We have a speaker that will be live with you, and then also at the conclusion, and then as you well know, that we will have our pre-recorded speakers will be with you for a question and answer for a pretty brief amount of time. We have a lot of topics to get through today, so there will also be, we are encouraging all of you to ask questions as you have them. Please put them in the chat. Those of us with KSB will be doing our best to monitor those, and that's the purpose of this, is that you get your questions answered. As you well know, there's a single Zoom link, and you cannot, we hope you're with us for the whole 3 hours, but if you do have to leave, you can just join us again by using the same link. So with all of the information that I've just presented to you, let's get down to the nuts and bolts. We're happy to have Dr. Craig Nyen-Swander, who is the Kansas State Department of Education, the Deputy Commissioner of Fiscal and Administrative Services, and he is here to visit with you with the broad topic of finance. So he's going to share a PowerPoint with you. Once again, if you have questions for Craig, please put them in the chat, and he is going to, as obviously consented, he said he would like to answer those as they come in, because he wants to visit with you about what is most important to you as board clerk. So Craig, it is all yours.
All right, well, thank you, Gary. And I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning and inside rather than out in the lovely weather we're having. Although in Topeka, we are above zero now. I don't know how you're doing where you are, but we're clear up to 9. So we're getting close to double figures even. Looking forward to some balmy weather later today. I always feel like I need to clarify. Gary introduced this as a virtual clerks workshop. I assume that means it's a virtual workshop for clerks rather than a workshop for virtual clerks. But I guess we'll see how that plays out as we go along. Hopefully, I'm going to share the correct screen. And you should be able to see a PowerPoint slide. And we'll just proceed with sharing a little information. And as Gary said, feel free to ask questions as we go along. I'd rather talk about what you're interested in than anything I might have on these slides. But there is a lot going on right now. So I'll try to touch several bases as we go through the next few minutes, hopefully clarify a few things. And like I say, if you can ask some questions, that'll help me clarify a little more perhaps. So first, for some reason, there it goes. Navigating next. You're going to hear a lot about this. You've already started hearing about it. Everything we do the last year and a half has to do with navigating, it seems like. The purpose of Navigating Next is to put some information out just to help school districts as you go prepare for the rest of this year and beginning next fall. What are those issues that the districts will need to address? Most of what you'll find in the document, which is already on our website, is not going to be new to you. But sometimes it can be helpful to have it all in one place, and a few thoughts that we've gathered from districts along the way, just to help you prepare and plan. How are you going to take care of your students the rest of this year? What are some things you can do for the class of 21 as they prepare to go out into the world and their next educational plans after high school? Because it's obviously been an unusual year for them, a little more difficult than usual even, for them to make plans about post-secondary opportunities. The other issue that Navigating Next will address a little bit is use of your ESSER funds. And that seems to get more complicated every day. So we'll touch on that just a little bit. Some of this is going to be review that you're familiar with, and some of it perhaps not. So at the moment, we have ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, which, by the way, those are not the official names, but that's what we tend to know it as. ESSER 1 refers to the money that became available last spring and you started spending then. And you're probably well aware the funds that came to the state from the federal level, 90% had to be allocated directly to school districts on the Title I formula. So it's not Title I money, but it's distributed on that formula. So for students, or I'm sorry, for school districts that have high poverty, they benefit more than others on a per pupil basis. And we'll come back to that in a moment.
Get out of it and restart it, maybe?
And we may need somebody to mute their microphone if they can. The funds must be spent on COVID-19 related expenses, as you're well aware. With ESSER 2, we got a new list of 15 allowable categories that districts can consider when developing their plans on how they're going to spend the money. Again, COVID related. And something new for us, for you, for everybody involved is an oversight committee. This will be a committee of 19 members with superintendents, business managers, teachers, legislators, board members, KSDE members. It's going to be chaired by Jim Porter, who's the chair of the State Board of Education. And the purpose of the committee is to review each school district's plan for how they're going to spend their ESSER 2 funds. And if they come to pass before too long, ESSER 3 funds. And give a little guidance that yes, those follow the federal guidelines, that plan does, or no, it doesn't. Really two purposes for that. One is hopefully to keep a district from spending money that the federal government will come in and audit and say, no, that was wrong, and make you give it back. So we're trying to prevent any district from falling into that situation. The other one is, it's just to be honest, it's a lot of money, close to $370 million in ESSER 2, which means it's getting scrutiny more than federal money usually does, politically, publicly, and other school districts as far as that goes. So this is a way to provide some transparency about how the money is being spent. So that's the purpose of the oversight committee. They are going to meet for the first time next week and just kind of put together their plan for how they will work, all 19 members. And at the moment, they intend to meet, at least in the beginning, every Friday afternoon for 2 hours. You can anticipate in perhaps the first week of March, you'll receive guidelines on how to submit your plan as a district. And then that committee will meet as often as they need to be able to approve plans as they come in, 30 to 50 plans at a time if necessary. Once your plan's approved, you can start drawing down those funds just like you do every other federal fund, whether it's Title I or anything that's on the Form 240. So probably the earliest you'll be able to draw down ESSER 2 funds is April 1st, and each month then thereafter. All right, move along. A little more about the money. So there's the official names for ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. ESSER 1 was the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, $76 million. You have until September of 2022 to spend that money. And as I said, because it's distributed on the Title I formula, the actual per pupil amount in any given district ranged from $15 per student to $538. And on the ESSER 2 funds, you see down below distributed the same way, Title I formula, and the range was $66 to $2,354 per student, depending on the district and the level of poverty there. And you have until September of 2023 to spend the ESSER II funds. And you are required, you see at the bottom of the screen, to track those funds separately. You can't just report to the federal government all of the ESSER funds as one expenditure. It has to be separated out by what you spend in ESSER I and ESSER II. So referring to those amounts per pupil in given districts, if you're one of the districts that receives $66 per student in the ESSER II funds, even though you don't have a lot of poverty, a lot of the needs of the pandemic are consistent across districts. You've still got to clean your facilities. You've still got to provide PPE. You're still looking to provide perhaps summer school or before and after school programs because your students have had some issues. That's not restricted just to students in poverty. $66 a student doesn't cover some of those basic needs. So as we look at what to do with the 10% set aside, we're going to take that into account. That 10% is what we used with ESSER I and directed towards special education, about $8 million. And districts have been drawing that down as the year has gone along. For ESSER II, it's going to be about $36 million. Again, it's a lot of money in ESSER II. So one use for those funds, we've set aside an amount about $11.5 million would allow us to provide a floor, if you will, of $300 per student for every district. So in addition to what's allotted in the 90% on the Title I formula, if your district is not receiving at least $300 per student, we'll up the amount until we bring you up to that level so that everybody has a chance to meet some of the basic needs caused by the pandemic. Second provision is for the Kansas State Schools for the Deaf and School for the Blind. Those two are not unified school districts, so they get left out of the ESSER funds. They are technically in statute separate state agencies. They are state schools. So we visited with them about what kind of needs they have as a result of the pandemic. So of that 10% set aside, $150,000 will go to those two schools total, not $150,000 each. That leaves a balance of just under $24 million that we will again direct towards special education. And we will ask that that be drawn down and spent over 2 years' time, about $12 million each of the next 2 years. And the purpose of that is maintenance of effort, so that you don't draw it all down in the first year, spend it, and then have a maintenance of effort issue in the second year. Funding is increasing enough from the state that if we split that out over 2 years, we don't think will cause a maintenance of effort issue for any school districts or co-op. So that's our plans on the 10% set aside, and the state board approved those plans last week.
Greg, we do have a question from a clerk wanting to know, does every school district get ESSER II funding?
Yes, every school district will receive an amount based on the Title I formula, just like you did with ESSER I. And you'll be able to draw that down on a monthly basis, just like you do other federal funds, once your plan's been approved by the Oversight Committee.
There's some other questions here that relate to that. You may have answered them just right now, but will the ESSER II SPED money be separated like in ESSER I? And then what is some of the time frame that this monies may be coming to the local districts?
Okay. Yes, the special education money will be a separate pot, if you will, and drawn down separately, separate request. The same usage requirements that it has to relate to COVID-19 apply to those funds, though. So they've got the same list of 15 uses, but you target the money towards special education is the only difference. Time-wise, the earliest I think districts will be able to draw money down, and this won't apply to every district, but those that have had their plans approved would be April 1st. And then you have until September of 2023 to spend the money. So you've got a pretty good amount of time to spend the funds. Your plan can be built that way. one question that will be asked, okay, so we turn in our plan in March of this year. What happens when the kids come back and we realize, well, there's some needs we hadn't considered yet. Can we change our plan? Yes, we fully expect that districts will need to adjust their plan over the course of this timeline, and the oversight committee will continue to meet for that purpose.
Craig, another question that's come is, can ESSER 2 funds be used to cover expenditures that have already been encumbered or maybe actually spent? This particular district, their ESSER 1 funds are already depleted.
Good question. ESSER 2 has the same beginning timeline as ESSER 1, which means you can reimburse expenditures that happened clear back to last March, just like you did with ESSER 1. And that is, as with most federal funds, that's actually the federal government's preference. They like you spending the money as a reimbursement rather than, well, they won't let you pull it down and just sit on it. Okay, we'll pick up other questions as we go along here. Just quickly, because you won't have to deal with this directly, but so you'll know. Typically with federal funds, Title I and ESSER 1 were the same way. The public schools had a proportional amount they needed to provide for private schools. ESSER 2 is different. There are no funds for private schools in your ESSER 2 allotment. So whatever you draw down is just for your public school district. The funds for private schools are separate. They go through the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund to KSDE, and it's known as the Emergency Assistance for Non-Public Schools. So there's $26.7 million for services to non-public schools. That's a separate pot of money, and your public schools will not have to deal with that in ESSER 2. Now, what we've been told so far, if ESSER 3 comes to pass, it's going to revert back to the same way we did ESSER 1. We've got to do it different just so it can be more confusing for you. But in ESSER 2, you won't have to worry about how you're going to provide services to the private schools. KSDE will do that probably through contracts with the service centers. And the non-public schools have to apply to receive those services or that assistance. It is just like your Title I. We can't give the money to the private schools. We do provide services. Okay, I'm going to change topics. So if there's any other questions on ESSER, I'll take them now. And if they come up later, I'll take them then too. But all right. Estimate. We get asked about this time each year because you're starting to look at budgets for next year. You're starting to look at negotiations for next year. What's my general fund going to be next year? Well, obviously we don't know, but we can give you an estimate. And if you haven't been there yet, on our What's New website, we've posted an estimate for each district for 21-22 with the new base of $4,706. Of course, there are some assumptions built into that. That estimate is built off of your SO66 reporting. So the weightings and enrollment that you reported there, so it's not an audited enrollment for this year. It's not audited weightings for this year. We didn't do any projections towards what might happen next year. So if you have a virtual school and that enrollment was quite a bit higher this year, we didn't project that it's going to come down next year or be any higher than it already is. And for the special education increase, the legislature has appropriated $7.5 million. So we just took a proportional distribution across all the districts based on what you received a year ago. So that number is just kind of, it's even more of a ballpark than the rest of the printout is. But it'll give you a ballpark idea of what your general fund budget will look like next year. Now, there are a couple of other items built into that. One place we did make an adjustment is with transportation weighting. This is the last year school districts can use 2016-17 expenditures for transportation weighting if it was a higher amount. So if you've been using that, when we estimated what you'll have next year, we pulled that number out. And it's going to be based on what your weighting was this year, rather than the 16-17 number. Then one other thing to be aware of, and we can't adjust for this because we don't know the numbers yet, neither do you. Remember that your transportation weighting is limited to 110% of your expenditures from the prior year. So if you're one of the districts that has had to do remote learning this year and you haven't run your buses as much as usual, your expenditures are probably going to be lower. You're going to be limited next year to 110% of that lower amount. So bear that in mind if you're a district that has not had as much transportation expense as you usually have. Some of you may have a lot higher transportation expense trying to keep your buses running in this weather, but we'll worry about that on another day. So that's one of the assumptions built into that spreadsheet. And let me go back just a second before I get into this. I want to re-emphasize the spreadsheet is an estimate. Please don't let your superintendent call us next fall and say, you told us we'd get this amount of money and it didn't work out that way. No. We estimated. And my suggestion would be when you download that spreadsheet, unhide some of those columns that show the weightings. You know better than we do what's going to happen with your weightings next year. We didn't make any adjustments to them. You can do that. Plug in a new weighting if you know your at-risk weighting is going to increase, if you know you're going to have more or fewer students in career tech ed programs. Make those adjustments and you'll have a little bit better estimate than what we can provide.
Great. We have another question, transportation.
Yes.
Can a school district count meal delivery as transportation?
No, the transportation expenditures are limited to regular route expenditures for this purpose. When we look at the 110%, it's just to and from school with students. Delivering meals does not get to be included in that. Okay, next thing that's going to be a little bit of a change. In statute, school districts are allowed to adopt the statewide average percentage for a local option budget. Well, that percentage has been 30% for enough years that most think you can do a 30% LOB. That's what you're allowed to do. That's been true, but it's been true because that's what the statewide average has been. This year, it looks like the statewide average is going to be closer to 31%. We won't know that officially until June after all the audits are done, special education's in and so forth. So when you adopt your local option budget in the coming year, you could go to 31%. Your board could choose to do that without publishing a resolution subject to protest petition like you normally do to go above 30. So that's a different option that's available to you. Wanted to make districts aware of that because in March, we're going to send out a notice to you that there's an application for you to turn in to us real short. What's the maximum percentage your board might adopt next year? So you need to know that 31% is probably going to be an option for next year. Whatever you tell us on that application in March is your ceiling. You cannot exceed that. So if you're thinking, there's no way we'd go to 31 and you turn in 30, when August rolls around, you will not have the option to adopt any higher than 30. If you're thinking you might go to 33, tell us you're going to go to 33. You don't have to have all your resolutions published and so forth by April 1. This is just a statutory requirement that you tell us if you intend to go any higher than you typically do. And we'll ask every district to turn that in. So we wanted to make you aware that there's a good chance that average will be 31% this year. If you want to know how to calculate that, remember that's 31% of your general fund budget. So take 1% of your projected general fund for next year, and you're going to be pretty close to how much more money you could have for your LOB. All right, a little bit about legislation as we start to run out of time. Number of things that they're looking at, and I'm going to start on the bottom of the list. A lot of bills dealing with private school tax credits. They seem to come up with another one each month. One that would expand the tax credit for low-income student scholarship programs has already passed committee in both houses. Has not been debated on the floor yet, but has passed committee. That would allow any student qualifying for free or reduced price meals in any school in the state, elementary, middle school, or high school, to receive a tax credit. You see a couple of other bills there that are somewhat similar in that they create student accounts with the state treasurer with state revenues going into those accounts to allow parents to pay for private school tuition, is a short version of what those two do. Then the two items at the top of the list, high density at risk, that statute expired actually a year ago, but the legislature built into their school finance or their overall financing a proviso that would extend it for this year and next year. So we will continue to receive high density at risk. There are at least 3 bills out there that would put that back into statute and make it permanent. So we're not relying on a proviso each year. That would be important. That's about $55 million statewide. Then the 20 mil levy for your general fund can only be approved 2 years at a time. This is one of the years it expires. So the legislature will need to reapprove that. If not, they've got to find $752 million somewhere to fund the general fund state aid. And I think Legal Max, you know about. I'm about out of time, so I'll skip through that. That's just a reminder that you're going to get an audited Legal Max, which, all right, it's audited, everything's set, except for special education and virtual credits. You won't know those until June. And Gary, what kind of questions do I have?
Tell you what, we just look like we exhausted them, but we've got about 1.5, 2 minutes. So if you have any other questions, please put them on while we have Dr. Nineswander with us.
One thing I'll add, some of you may not be aware, you see there I've listed people to contact with questions. Some of you may not know Verl Peter has joined us in the interim. Well, started in January when the legislature came to town, and we'll keep him working with us for a while longer. For those of you that don't know Verl, he had the job as school finance director for, I want to say, 26 years, quite some time, and he has continued since he retired reviewing budgets. So some of you have met him when he reviewed your budgets in the summer. Very well versed in school finance, and we're really happy to have him back helping us out.
Craig, thank you so much for your time. And I think this might be unprecedented for remote learning. I can see every clerk is standing up, giving you a standing ovation. Just absolutely amazing.
I'm not even going to look. I'll just take your word on it.
Please don't. But thank you so much. Obviously, his contact information. Thank you for taking time to be with our clerks today, Craig. It's much appreciated. Clerks, with that, we hope that you stick with us. We've got Luke Soba is coming on next, so we're going to give a little bit of time for transition, and then I'm going to hand it off to Sue Gibbons, my able colleague, who will introduce Luke's session.
We'll give you just a minute or two to kind of regroup, and then I'll introduce Luke and we'll be ready to roll right on. We have about 20 minutes for this question and answer. And certainly one of my responsibilities is to make sure that I pay attention to the chat. So wait just a couple of minutes and make sure that everyone is settled back in. All right, Luke, I think we'll go ahead and get started. It is my pleasure to introduce Luke Soba, who is an attorney with Kansas Association of School Boards. Hopefully you were able to watch the on-demand video of Luke's presentation on leave. If not, don't let that stop you from asking some questions. He basically covered a lot of the information about FCCRA leave due to COVID, as well as some FMLA concerns that are related to that. So Luke, I will start as we enter questions in the chat. I'll watch for those. But Luke, I think there are a couple of things I want to address right up front. First of all, for those districts that extended FCCRA leave during this second semester, and certainly that was optional, but for those that did extend it, what kind of challenges are you hearing about for those districts, and how might we avoid those in the future? And then I'll let you answer that, and then we'll go to the second issue.
Okay, sure. And good morning, Sue. Good morning to everybody. I'm glad you all attended. Let me apologize a little bit in advance. You may hear a vacuum running outside the door. We had a water pipe burst this morning. We tried to tune that out as much as we could, but I want them to run that vacuum so I don't have to swim out of here when I'm done. So yeah, we got a lot of water outside, just outside the door here. So a number of districts did choose to extend FFCRA through the year. Some had negotiated with their teachers through an MOA to do that, an MOU to do that for their certified staff, and thought it was the right thing to do to just extend it for everyone. And we sort of advise districts that it's probably a good idea to do it because the virus hasn't gone away. There's still people who need to have leave so they don't come to school and bring the virus into the facilities. Probably the biggest problem we've had with FFCRA from the beginning has been, as with most things, it's been a few people who either because they just think, gosh, there's 2 weeks of leave I can get, or because they rightly are really worried about the virus. They thought they were having symptoms, and so they went and got a diagnosis. I know there are districts that have had people that 4 or 5 times went to try to get a test, and it came back negative, and they, a few days at a time had used up their leave. And now in the spring, maybe those people have actually caught the virus, and then they don't have any FFCRA leave time left. So the short answer on that is, once they've exhausted their 2 weeks of leave time, they're not entitled to any more. So that's probably the biggest thing. It's as with most things, like I said, just a few people. And I don't want to denigrate those folks who are worried about the virus. I think anyone should be concerned about the virus. And for myself now, especially, we're getting close to where vaccines are available for people. It would be a shame to catch a terrible case of this virus now. So, as with everything, we encourage you to work with people, but if they've used up their 10 days of leave, they're not entitled to any more.
Well, that brings up the next question, Luke, and that is in relation to the vaccine. And as you have begun to get questions about people who might have possibly a reaction to the vaccine, and whether or not that also will qualify for that FFCRA leave extension, what are some of the issues surrounding that? Right.
So I need to sort of backtrack on some advice I gave earlier about the vaccine, first of all. So, the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission, and the Department of Labor had said, based on prior precedent, that an employer can require someone to get a vaccine as a condition of working there. And we had talked about whether schools could do that. With respect to your teachers, you have to negotiate for it because it's a condition of employment. We have to backtrack a little bit because some learned scholars have pointed out that there are prior cases involving emergency use authorization vaccines that say you cannot require people to get that. So we want to ease off. We can still encourage folks to get it, but we probably can't just go out and require employees to get it as a condition of employment. There will be more information coming out about this in the next Clerk's News. I'll write an article about it. So I want to back off on that. So we have had this question pop up that Sue raised, that people go to get the vaccination and then they have a reaction to it. And it's fairly common. It's usually a day or two that they just don't feel good, maybe have some light symptoms, but don't feel good enough to work. Does that qualify for FFCRA leave? Short answer is it really doesn't fit any of the definitions. I mean, the closest one would be experiences symptoms, but remember there's 2 parts to that. You can't work because you're experiencing symptoms and seeking a diagnosis. Well, these folks aren't really seeking a diagnosis. So what we would recommend you do, if people are getting the vaccination, chances are they should not need to take extended leave later. If they haven't used any of their time, we would recommend that you go ahead and give them FFCRA leave for those days that they're experiencing symptoms. We don't want to create disincentives to people going out and getting the vaccination. We really want to encourage people to get it. So if you can provide them paid leave because they're experiencing symptoms, that's fine. And then sort of a tangential issue too, I know that some districts called and asked about, well, we would extend the FFCRA, but can we make leave under the extended FFCRA contingent on getting the vaccination? Short answer there, I think you can, because you're creating a packet of rights that people wouldn't have had but for the board deciding to extend it. But I would be a little bit careful about saying you have to either get the vaccination or you're not entitled to this leave, because of 2 reasons. One, again, it's an emergency use authorization vaccine. And beyond that, it's not readily available to everybody. So for example, if KSB had that rule that, yeah, we'll go ahead and allow FFCRA leave, but only if you've had a vaccination. There's no way I could qualify because I'm 52 years old, don't fit into the high risk groups, and I probably won't have a vaccine available to me till June or July. So we want to be fair and equitable about all of this stuff. So you probably can put that condition on. I just wouldn't recommend it right now because, a lot of people who want to get the vaccine can't even get it yet.
Luke, we have a question in the chat, and I think you'll be able to answer it very quickly, but I want to expand on it just a little bit. The question is, the exhaustion of the 10 days does not have to be consecutive. Is that correct? And then talk about, does it extend into the extension that some districts have given? So talk about that.
Right. So it does not have to be 10 consecutive days. It's 10 total days or 80 hours for a full-time hourly employee. And I think a number of employees across the state did, like I talked about earlier, thought they were having symptoms. They went to get the test, took a few days to get the results back. So maybe they missed 3 or 4 days. If they missed 4, they would still have 6 left. And the way that we drafted the resolution that most districts used, it's just a continuation. It's as if it didn't expire. I think a lot of districts did choose not to continue with the expanded FMLA, where you could take 12 weeks to take care of kids when schools and daycares weren't there. But other than that, everything is just as it was. So if someone used 4 days previously, they would have 6 left for a future event.
So those 10 days don't restart with the extension if districts chose to extend FFCRA leave. They don't restart. They're throughout the entire year. So one question we have is, where do we find your information on demand leave? Your on-demand leave information.
I assume someone's asking about where the recorded session is, and it should have been included, with the link that you got for the seminar.
And I think the other piece to that is, if you are members of our Legal Assistance Fund, a lot of those resources are on our portal, which there's actually a session later on today about how to use the portal. So that'll be a great opportunity for you to sit in on that session and see how to get hold of a lot of those resources that are in print material, not just the on-demand video. So Luke, you really—
One other thing I want to point out real quick, Sue, that we get questions about, from the beginning when FFCRA was enacted, there were some employees that, in the judgment of employers, not just school employers, but all employers, did not act responsibly. They took a vacation, they went on a cruise, they went to some place that was high risk. Why should we have to give them paid leave for their irresponsible actions? And I understand that thinking, believe me, I understand that thinking. But right now, every place is a hotspot. So I don't know how you would assume that risk. We have some people who don't believe in wearing a mask, and they put themselves and others at risk by engaging in that behavior. And the thing I tried to stress all along is that, remember, the purpose of the leave is to try to prevent the virus from spreading to other people. And if we engage in that kind of assignment of fault and say, no, you don't get the leave because you brought this on yourself, we are putting other people at risk by doing that. So we don't recommend that fault come into play when you decide whether someone should, even now that we've created this new packet of rights by extending the act. We don't recommend that you consider someone to be at fault for infecting themselves and then deny them leave on that basis. That puts everyone else at risk.
That's a great point. And our staff has provided a lot of information in the chat about the landing page and how to access many of the resources. I found that landing page to be really helpful. So go back to that original email, the one you used to find this link, and you'll find that landing page for the on-demand video library. Luke, you opened the door to the second piece of your presentation, and that is, explain a little bit how FCCRA and FMLA are linked and the implications on FMLA, especially that non-consecutive accumulation of FMLA.
Right. Now, FMLA, broadly speaking, provides up to 12 weeks of leave for employees who have a serious medical condition. And I think in the presentation we went through what a serious medical condition entails, but again, speaking in broad terms, if someone is under a doctor's care and can't work because of that, then they probably qualify for FMLA. Doesn't mean they have to be hospitalized, just under doctor's orders, and the doctor's orders preclude them from working. So you get up to 12 weeks of leave for those conditions. FFCRA is paid leave, of course, but if someone is out on FFCRA for an extended period of time, it could count toward their FMLA allotment as well. I don't think most have probably calculated it that way, but just keep in mind, FMLA could be implicated if someone misses for any medical condition, has to miss work. And I think FMLA gets misunderstood a little bit by people. I mean, FMLA, what it really does is protects someone's job position when they have a health condition. We ought to be granting that liberally because it really is to the benefit of employers to get that FMLA clock running when people are out for medical conditions. So that then if we have to hire a replacement, we're free to do that. You know, most of us don't think of it that way, but you know, if someone's going to be out for a medical reason for extended period of time, send the FMLA paperwork, let's get it on file so that then all of our options are open.
Luke, one of the things that you addressed in the video is that 1,250 hour requirement in order to be eligible for FMLA. What kind of policy should districts have in place regarding that piece of things?
Well, districts look at it a couple of different ways. I mean, the 1,250 hours is a look back from the date of the request for leave. So we look back and see whether the employee has worked 1,250 hours in the previous 12 months. So if they have, then they've met that baseline requirement. The sort of separate and confusing part of it is the district decides when the 12-week clock will run for their time off. Most districts, I think, it's a fiscal year thing. So every fiscal year, that 12-week allotment gets replaced. In other words, if someone has taken 4 weeks in the previous year, once we hit the fiscal year anniversary, their bank is back full with 12 weeks that are available for leave. So I think people do get confused about that. You know, but if someone comes and tells you, I've got to have knee surgery, I'm going to be off for 8 weeks, first thing we do is look back to see, has this person worked 1,250 hours? Have they been employed by the district for a full year? Because that's a baseline requirement too. If they meet those things, then they're qualified for it. It's a matter of how many days are in their bank. Do they have 12 weeks or not? That is often determined by the fiscal year. It could be, you know, people do it different ways. Some do it based on the anniversary of hire date. I think I went through some of those things in the presentation, but don't get confused about the two. And I see there's a question, FMLA is not paid unless they have leave, correct? That's true, FMLA is unpaid leave, but it can run concurrently with paid leave. So again, if someone, for example, is having a knee surgery and says, going to have to be off for 8 weeks, I have paid leave for that, send the FMLA paperwork anyway. Let's have that run at the same time. You know, again, in case it would wind up being longer than the 12 weeks and we're in a pickle because we need a cook or we need a bus driver or whatever.
Janet, that was an excellent distinction to make. FMLA is basically assurance of a job after leave, but the FCCRA is different. And so that was an excellent question. Next question we have is, a district can do FMLA on a 12-week rolling forward or 12 weeks from the first date off.
I'm not sure if that's a question or so much as a statement.
Maybe clarification.
Yeah, I think so. So yeah, I mean, you're going to get, and again, FMLA doesn't have to be used all in the full 12 weeks at a time either. So once someone starts, their first day off is the first day of FMLA leave. There's no wait period required for it as long as our paperwork's in place. And as I said, we look back to see if they meet their requirements, and then it's 12 weeks either for fiscal year or however your policy has set it up.
So the next question, Luke, is really about procedure. So how does their paid time off work with FMLA, and does it count toward it? Our policy states all paid time off has to be exhausted before they can take a dock and pay. So we're talking about that, where those two merge, that FCCRA paid time off and FMLA. So how do you see that playing out procedurally?
So they can run concurrently. If someone tells you I'm going to need to be off, I have paid leave, that's fine, but you inform them it's also going to be FMLA time, send the designation notice out, and that's fine. So the paid time off can count toward the 12 weeks of FMLA. You don't have to allow them to stack it and say, well, I've got 8 weeks of paid leave and then I want to start FMLA. You can require that it run at the same time. And we recommend that you do so. So paid time off can count toward the FMLA allotment.
And Luke, the way I read Beth's question is that they can't choose not to take the paid time leave off if their policy requires that they have to exhaust all available leave first.
Right. You can have a policy that says that everybody has to, they can't just choose to do a dock day. That's fine. If that's what the policy says, then it's okay to follow that policy.
Beth, I love your start to this next question. I don't want to beat a dead horse. And I know it sometimes seems like that, but there is no question in something we've never experienced before that isn't relevant. So thanks for asking it. But could you again specify if our district decided to extend FCCRA to our employees, do we need to allow these hours to count if the employee has to be off with an ill child or a child without daycare?
Right. So within that 2-week packet of time that they have, remember there were several reasons you could take that. One was being told to quarantine yourself. One was having symptoms and seeking a diagnosis. One was to stay home with an ill family member who either had to quarantine or was actually sick with COVID. So if they haven't used any of their days and they've got a sick child, they can stay home and they get the FFCRA leave for it. Remember, that's at 2/3 pay. It's not at the full rate. So yeah, you would, if they haven't used their 12 days for any, or, I'm sorry, haven't used their 2 weeks for anything else. I'm stuck on 12 because of FMLA. Then if they have a sick child, someone that's home with COVID or quarantined because of COVID, then yeah, they would qualify under the expanded, the extended FFCRA.
I know many districts took the daycare piece out of their extensions, and so that.
Yeah, and I didn't really address the last part of that. I mean, if they say, well, my daycare is not available, so I need FFCRA leave. If the district didn't choose to extend that part, then no, they could be required to use their own accrued leave. They would not get FFCRA benefits for it.
Well, I had two very specific instructions from Mr. Sechrist when I told him I would help with this. The first was you have to pay attention to the chat, Sue, which is important for me because I'm just a little bit distractible. And the second piece was you must stick to the time frame. We have about 2 minutes left before we'll turn it back over to the next question and answer session with Mr. Sechrist. So I want to tell you that even if you still have questions, Luke Soba can be reached by email at lsoba@kasb.org. Please send your questions to him if you still have questions about leave, especially as they relate to these times that we are dealing with a lot of transitioning. And certainly as you get closer to those FMLA limits for some of your employees. So Luke, any closing comments? You've got 1 minute before Mr. Sechrist shuts us off.
Nope, happy to take emails or phone calls. I think I'm on a first name basis with most of you since FFCRA, so that's been great. I'd sure like COVID to go away so we don't have to talk about it. We've talked more about leave in the last year than in the last 10 years combined, probably. So let's get things back to normal, please.
Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. Mr. Sechrist, we're going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Sue. Luke, thank you very much for your information. A reminder, please go back and look at Luke's video. It was very helpful and obviously would be able to answer some of the questions that you may have that relate to leave, especially during our pandemic times. Alec and Leah, we've got approximately 5 minutes, and Sue, you did perfect because we want to have 5 minutes before we start Angie here. If there is, I believe there was a little video, and I believe this is a pertinent place to insert that. So Leah and Alec, I would ask that you get that going, and then we'll start with Mrs. Stahlbaumer at the conclusion. Thank you for that. You may see that more than once today. If you have any questions about those particular services, we hope that you will contact KASB so that we can be assistance to you. It's my pleasure to introduce Angie Stahlbaumer, who is the Assistant Executive Director of Legal Services, and she's going to be visiting with us about the Kansas Open Meetings Act and KORA, Kansas Open Records Act. And obviously, I would imagine that you found this to be extremely important during your board meetings during these unprecedented times. So, Angie, I'm going to open it up with you and see if there's anything that you would like to recap. And once again, we'd love to have questions. So Angie, it's all yours.
Sorry about that. You'd think by month, whatever, what, almost 12, I would know to unmute myself. So welcome everyone. I tell you what, my children have either been remote learning or out of school since a week ago Wednesday. So I can't tell you how excited I am to see all of you. So it's great to have you all here, and I'm so excited. We have such great numbers for this. So I have a little bit of, a very condensed PowerPoint, if that's helpful. Obviously, I would rather answer your questions as they come in. So please don't be hesitant to put those in the chat, because I know your questions are better than anything I can dream up. So please do. Otherwise, I guess with the time that I had, I was just going to recap some of the issues that we see most frequently and that I wanted to share with you. Gary, are you seeing my slides?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So, the topic of the PowerPoint was to talk about the Kansas Open Meetings Act and the Kansas Open Records Act predominantly. And so, the idea behind both of those is transparency and governance. The idea is we want those that are governing us to do that where the public can consume what's happening. And so what I think, as an attorney, I always need to know what the definitions of everything are, because, how are we to know when we're supposed to follow all these rules if we don't know what a meeting is for COMA purposes? So I want to real quickly just highlight what those definitions are so that we all, for any of us that haven't watched the video, you might have that in the back of your mind as we move forward with some questions. The first element of what a meeting is, and there are three, is that it has to be an interactive communication. So by interactive, we mean not just one way, not a one-way communication, but you have several people back and forth having a conversation. The next piece of it is that it has to include a majority of the membership of the board. So if you have 5 board members because you've had 2 resignations, keep in mind the majority of the full membership is still going to be 4. So you don't have to worry about, oh, suddenly is 3 a majority? Do we need to be concerned? No, you don't technically need to be concerned. It's 4 is that magic number. So always keep that in your mind. The next piece is that you have to be discussing school business. So if we all find each other at a wedding, and there's 4 board members congregating and talking about, how good the food spread is, that technically is not a meeting. For public perception purposes, we'd still recommend you kind of split up just so that people don't think you're trying to do things in places that you're not supposed to. But otherwise, those are the main components. Now, we've seen serial meetings really come on the scene. I think this change was made in the law in 2009. And at the time, it wasn't as clear that maybe these things were happening. But now we have board members emailing constantly and texting and messaging. And there are so many different ways for us to communicate than when this law first came on the scene that it is possible for us to have serial meetings. So keep in mind, you don't have to be in the same place at the same time. The important part is that if you're having a conversation that involves 4 or more board members, it's on a common topic and it has to do with some sort of board action, those are the main elements. So you need to be really careful. And I know you all as clerks are the gatekeepers. You are the parliamentarians. So it is especially important for you all to say, hey, everyone, just keep in mind this, and feel free to use us as the bad guys and say, hey, I believe this is what you should be doing, but maybe you should call KASB, and I trust that Ashley or Luke or myself or Donna will give them the same advice. So just
Angie, we do have a question.
Oh, good. Okay.
And by the way, Angie, you didn't include me. I did stay at a Holiday Express, so they can call me on occasion too. So,
Gary's been giving excellent legal advice for years.
no, I do not.
No concern.
The question from Mary Ann is if there was a schedule to have a regular board meeting, and then, so let's say due to weather, they've decided to do a Zoom. You have to make that public for everyone.
Right. Good question, Marianne. Yes. Yes, you do. So if you decide to change the way that it's being provided to the public, I guess it's possible that you would just stream that from a location at the school. But if the board members aren't coming because the weather is such that you don't think it's safe for travel, I would recommend figuring out a way to make that available to anybody. Essentially, anytime the board is meeting and making decisions, it has to be open to the public. So if I were in that circumstance, you can cancel for severe weather, and I think some of you have this last meeting cycle. And if you do have to cancel altogether, then you just need to let people know within 24 hours when you're rescheduling that meeting too. But yeah, under those circumstances, I would put out notice to everybody that requires notice that, hey, by the way, now we're having it via Zoom. I'd probably post some sort of paper on the door where you normally have the meeting in case people do physically show up, that here's how you get it, put it on your website, however you put information out to people, and just ensuring that those individuals that require specific notice get it, that you're changing how you're providing access to the meeting.
Angie, there's another question there that pertains, I think we go back to your serial meetings, but if a superintendent and board are emailing back and forth in an open group, or maybe it's texting, do they need to include the clerk in those conversations? And does that need documented in any sort of minutes?
Yes, Janet, that's a great question. So I would recommend that they stop that practice. So what I would recommend that your boards do is that they consider the communication to be one way from the superintendent. So I think what a lot of districts do is, if you have an individual question as a board member, it's okay to give that to the superintendent, but I would email the superintendent directly. And then if the superintendent feels this is an information item that the rest of the board needs, the superintendent would then email the full board. But the board needs to be really careful not to engage in a reply all situation. And we're actually, sometimes a better workaround is to ensure that the superintendent always uses blind carbon copies. So it's not so easy to always just reply all and grab everybody at the same time. So technically what's happening, if that's happening, and there's a discussion involving 4 or more board members, common topic of discussion that would require action by the board, is you're essentially having a serial meeting. And if you're having a meeting, that needs to be open to the public. So that's one of those things that, your question was, do you need to be there and take minutes? I would prefer that it stop, because what you're having is you're having a private meeting that's not open to the public. So instead of injecting you into that process, I would just make sure that they understand the superintendent can give information down to the whole group, but the whole group cannot interact. Very good question. So it looks like that's all I have at the moment, but
Angie, I'd like to, just to go along with that, your previous slide on serial meetings, I want to clarify, if you would, please. So if the board president, or maybe the superintendent, is calling a board member, just one board member, but doing that over the course of time on one subject, would that be considered a serial meeting? So board president, how are you going to vote on the bus? Thank you. Calls the next, only talking to one board member. Is that a serial meeting?
Right. Good question. So what I want you to think about is, are the board members, or at least 4 board members, having an interactive communication? So if the superintendent in a opportunity to check everyone's temperature on what they want to do with some sort of action, and oftentimes I think superintendents do want to know, hey, should I put this on the agenda or should I not? So if the superintendent calls Gary board member, and Gary board member says, yeah, I would vote yes for that. And then the superintendent calls Ashley board member, and Ashley board member said, yeah, I'd vote yes for this. And in the course of time, he calls 4 board members. So long as he's not sharing with Gary and with Ashley and with Amy and and Ted and all of these people that he calls what the discussion was with the other board members, it's not technically a meeting. So can your superintendent every once in a while just see how you're doing on this one issue? Technically, yes, as long as he doesn't share that feedback back, he or she. Okay, so good call on that. But
Angie,
telephone calls can get into trouble.
there's more important question because it comes from a clerk. When this clerk posts the special board agenda, she knows that they're not allowed to amend it. But can the board decide to take action on an item that was listed as discussion on a special agenda?
Okay. Yeah, good question. What I would start using maybe a little more liberally is flexibility in your language, Christina. I would probably say possible action on, if it's an executive session for personnel, and possible action on contracts or something like that, then at least people are advised that it may happen. You don't know that it's going to happen, but it's on there. I would say that probably as long as whatever they did was covered under the umbrella of what the meeting was called for, you're in a better position. I would much prefer that if you said something was solely going to be discussed and not acted upon, it would be safer to wait to deal with that. So I would just be really flexible and really broad as you put those agendas together to allow for possible action on anything that they might be considering. Good question. Anybody else? It looks like we don't have anything right now, so I'm gonna cruise. I have a couple of very cheesy scenarios that we could go through if you all don't have better questions. Let's see, what do we have here? No, we have several topics on the agenda. The president wants it to be a discussion. Another member wants it to be a motion. Okay, so it's kind of hijacked. You have the general topic right there. It's listed on the agenda as a discussion item. It's probably not going to be a huge deal as long as people knew what was coming. But from a complete transparency standpoint, it's always better that you let people know that action may be taken. I'm thinking of situations where, especially if you're open that we're not going to take any action about something, like if we're touring a facility, hey, 4 more board members may be together, we're just having a walkthrough of the elementary school, no action will be taken, and then suddenly you decide to take action, that would be bad. So I would err on the side of tabling that, if at all possible, to the next board meeting, because people weren't given proper notice of what may transpire at that meeting. But that's very good. Let's see, Marianne says, what if they add discussion or action just in case? Yes, so I would say leave it flexible. We're going to talk about personnel, possible action on contracts, possible action on X, Y, and Z. So I would always do that. If you think there's even a Hail Mary of a chance that they're going to go there, I would probably put it on there. Good questions. So executive session, just in case anybody is kind of still confused about how this works. There were some changes put in the law a couple of years ago. And so when we used to be able to say, we're just going to go into executive session for security measures, we now have to put a lot more detail into it. So we have to recess into executive session. So that's one thing. We have to be in an open meeting first. That meeting has to be called to order. And then we recess into executive session, and that motion has to include a subject for what we're going to talk about. It has to talk about the justification in the law, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail. How long we're going to be in there, or a start time and stop time, however you want to do that. And then really keep in mind that nobody but the board members really has a golden ticket to get into that place. A lot of times they're going to invite your superintendent to come in, because the superintendent is going to be the connection to most of the information that they need to make those decisions. Okay, just checking the chat. So, justifications under the law. Here is a list of the types of things that we can legally go into executive session to discuss. So personnel matters, we can consult with an attorney. Okay, one thing I will tell you is your attorney needs to be there, either calling in or Zooming in or however you want to handle that. It's not appropriate for you to relay information that you received from your attorney without your attorney being present. That's part of the kicker there. Okay, Brenda has a question. If someone wants to add an action in the middle of a meeting, how do you word that in the minutes? Okay, good question. And so, Brenda, I'm going to assume that this is I'm going to assume that this is during a regular meeting, not a special meeting, and it's on topic. You can't amend a special meeting agenda, but if someone wants to add an action item, we prefer that it happens at the beginning of the meeting, so you know the flow of the meeting, but all it will take essentially is a second and 4 votes to add that if you haven't already included it in the agenda. So I would hope that your board members kind of get away from doing that, but in the minutes, it would you just kind of take that tangent with them that there was a motion by Angie to add this as an action item. There was a second by Ashley. There were 4, motion carried, and then you go into whatever that motion or discussion or action item is. So it doesn't make sense with how the meeting was running, but that's kind of how you have to handle it. And then pick back up where you left off as they come back on the rails. So good question. Regular meeting, good deal. Okay. So yeah, so here are the justifications, and I know we're running out of time, and I don't want to be on Gary's naughty list, so I'm going to just move through this pretty quickly. But another one that kind of gets in some people in trouble is the property one. So keep in mind that the only reason you can go in to talk about property is if you're trying to acquire land or buildings, not if you're trying to sell it. I think sometimes that is flipped and it would be inappropriately used. Real quickly on Open Records Act, I think you all get that most of the records that are in your possession have to be provided. There are some exceptions. If you want the exact statute on that, I believe it's KSA 45-221. So you can go and look through, and there's a bunch of different exceptions. And if we can ever be helpful in figuring that out, I would love to help you with that. With whatever time we have left, I have a couple of scenarios we could walk through. This one's a Facebook type one, and I get Facebook's your grandma's social media these days. But let's just say you have 5 of your 7 board members that have Facebook pages set to private. Okay, their friends include the other board members that are on there. One member posts on the wall, "I'll be voting yes on a bond issue for a new practice gym. Who's with me?" Okay, think about that. What if the discussion includes only parents and community? What if other board members respond? What if 3 board members like that? And I wanted to open it up for discussion, but we're having really good here. Sandy, the open record statute that talks about what you are not obligated to provide is KSA 45-221. And that will have all of the exceptions in there. Okay, good questions. Oh, okay. So this is one to think about. I know my time is coming to a close with you. Just keep in mind, if board members are going to use their walls, it should be for discussion only. I think when this board member said, "Hey, I'm going to vote yes," it was a dangerous statement because they're saying to all other board members, "This is how I'm going to vote." If 3 other board members liked that, I think they're communicating how they would vote. And I think technically you're having serial meeting type discussions. So everyone, thank you for your time. Gary, I'm going to turn it over to you so I don't rain on everybody staying on schedule parade.
Angie, thank you so much for staying on time. I didn't realize everybody was so fearful of Gary, but kind of feels halfway decent for a couple hours. Appreciate it. Excellent information. If you do have questions for Angie or any of our attorneys, feel free to call Even if you put them on the chat, we'll still try to get to those somehow. So please feel free to do that. We are going to have about a 5-minute break. I believe they're going to put the video back on. So if you need to take a comfort break, please feel free to do that. But we will actually get started right at 10:20. So we do have about 5 minutes. So please be with us in 5 more minutes to be with Ashley Rohleder Webb. Thank you. Well, welcome back. Thank you. Looks like we have Ashley with us. I'd like to introduce Ashley Rohleder Webb. And Ashley, we probably should have had you last because you're kind of the catch-all with everything COVID. So this will be a great opportunity to have a pretty broad brush on some of the items that our clerks have encountered. Ashley, could you give us a brief overview of what your video was, and then we'll see if we have any questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I feel like this might be kind of a quiet session, Gary, because I talked about two things, leave and coma. So if you have some questions left over from what Luke and Angie were each talking about, I was talking more specifically in the COVID realm. But one of the big things with coma, just kind of working backwards, like Angie said, I think that we know a lot of you have in the last year. I still can't even believe it's 2021, but it's, we saw a lot of moves to different kinds of virtual meeting spaces, and now being able to utilize that again in this cold weather and snow and ice. I was disappointed when I looked out my window this morning and saw that it was still snowing. But that those options are available, and that was one piece. Excuse me. The other big thing, I've set myself up for this several times during COVID. When I recorded my video, it was actually on Inauguration Day, so it's been a few weeks. And we were talking about how, with the transition of administrations, we were waiting to see what new laws might be out there, if there wouldn't be a new form of leave, a replacement for FFCRA, something like that. But there isn't yet. So Congress is still working through that, trying to figure out what kind of relief might be on the horizon. But as of now, there isn't a replacement for FFCRA. So like I know we talked about earlier with Luke, many of you I know have adopted the old FFCRA rules through resolution. Probably not the whole thing. I think even in our form, we left off that child care leave piece, but that is a part that is, it's up to you. If you want to grant to be obliged to provide that, you can put that on, your board can decide to take that on, but really just those first four categories are what are in the form resolution. But for now, no updates. I feel like I kind of feel like Charlie Brown with the football, like Lucy keeps pulling it away because I want to be able to tell you about new law, but we just don't have it. So that's pretty much the overview. Do you have questions?
Well, Ashley, I have a question that probably goes to Kansas Open Meetings Act, but I think it really has become pertinent during COVID board meetings. So I've heard reports and board members have been getting text messages during board meetings, acting upon those. Is there any advice for clerks on either the legality or whether that is something good practice or not?
I would definitely say not a great practice. And I'm taking that to mean that the text messages are coming from the outside, and it's not just, hey, honey, you're kind of slouching, sit up. But looking at something like, a community member texting during the meeting because they want to give their input, the biggest thing I would say is let's treat it like many of you are treating classrooms. Put your phone away. You don't, at that point, the time has passed for community members to give their input. I think that you do have a little bit of an issue because generally your policy or meeting rules are going to lay out how public can comment during meetings. So it's not, okay, well, Angie tells me that maybe we're not thinking about this right. We need to switch up how we're approaching it, or, oh, never mind. Gary said that he thinks we should go another way on this. And I want to speak for Gary in this space. Gary and Angie know where to find you all week. If they have your number, they could have contacted you before that meeting. So waiting until that meeting time is probably something to discourage. It looks like there might be some activity in the chat side.
Well, Ashley, and I know this is probably a question that Luke, but I'm going to put it out there, and you may say this may not be something I can answer, but for the board to choose to remove the child care part, would that require a memorandum of understanding with the faculty? And as a technical college, do we have to do an MOU for FFCRA? and that would need to be amended. So I'm putting you on the spot and I'll see where you need to go with that.
Yeah. So the MOUs that many districts and colleges have entered into are going to be that's setting your baseline, and the board can through like this resolution, and they're offering something above and beyond the leave that's been agreed to. So it's an extra benefit that those people are getting. So they don't have to say, well, we want to give you this full benefit that used to be there from the federal government. We're offering you an additional benefit. We're just doing it in a slightly different way than what the feds required previously. As far as in your MOU, if your MOU has said, this is where you can get leave, and all considerations for COVID leave are in that agreement, then you're correct. You won't be able to go add on additional. I don't think anybody's going to complain if you give them additional leave options. I just have a suspicion, but if your MOU has limited you, you are in a little different footing than those who have not limited themselves.
Ashley, I'm going to give it an opportunity for you. I know that you as a legal team have got a lot of questions of probably incidents that are not as common or have been more common because of COVID. Is there a general topic out there that this would be a great opportunity for you to talk to clerk, about this has really become common and you would like to explain to them either as it relates to COMA, CORA, leave, policies, procedures? I'm putting you on the spot again, but what's out there that seems to be really a common issue that this would be a great opportunity to talk to 110 clerks at one time?
Well, one thing I've learned this morning is I need to go before Luke and Angie so they can be in hot seats. No, I think that some of the things that we've noticed, and I do see, I want to draw everybody's attention. Luke had a comment, and he does so much more with our negotiations piece and working with bargaining units. So he does have some notes there, and I'll just draw your attention to that because I don't want to read to you. But some things that we've noticed, some points to bring up here. One, in those Zoom meetings or Facebook Live, however you're doing your maybe remote meeting, do consider how you're voting. We have heard some hiccups there that votes are being conducted in a way that normally in your meeting space, you're going to have your vote that people know how you're voting or how your board members are voting. But we have heard that there are some more secret votes going on through Zoom, just because that's been easier, or that's the way people have thought to use that technology. But that's something that will be a secret ballot that isn't allowed under COMA unless somebody is going to, you clerks are going to retain those and keep those in perpetuity with your minutes. And I think that that's an added headache where you could very easily say, all right, we're going to vote on this, and either go person by person or otherwise be able to more easily reflect how the vote is going.
So actually with that, the rules really haven't changed. I'm assuming that either with a virtual board meeting that the public still needs to be able to either see and or hear each individual board member's vote.
Yes, so need to see and or hear, like you said. And the other piece of that you do have to have that level of access for your public in general. So they need to be able to see or hear everything that's happening. And you want to make sure that the method you're using isn't restrictive to that participation or that audience by the public. So something like Zoom is a great resource because you have an option to call in. So if somebody doesn't have internet access, they can still dial a phone number and be, conference call style to participate. Whereas something like YouTube, somebody has to have an internet connection for. And most people do, but I think we've also learned in the last year just how limited some people are in their internet access in our communities. Additionally, you don't want to be having, wow, you don't want to hold your meeting in some kind of software that would be restricted, that you need a subscription for, and that would require an additional cost to your public to use.
So, Angie, are you still there with us? So Angie, let me ask this question. I know that board members are allowed to go into executive session. Their names don't have to be part of the motion. But if a board member is attending the executive session through either phone conference, video conference, and maybe they're the only one, should that be noted in the motion that board member Gary Sechrist will be attending through video conference, phone call, or is that necessary?
Yeah, good question. I would, Gary. I would say if it's not visible to everyone how a person is joining the meeting, I would say Gary Sechrist joined by teleconference or by Zoom or something like that to reflect that when they join and when they leave. So if Gary only hops on for executive session because he's in an airport somewhere, it should say, Gary entered at such and such time, Gary by phone conference, Gary left at this time. So I would do that.
We do have a question, Ashley, and or
I see a couple there.
yeah.
Beth's
So
question.
you can answer.
Yeah, and Luke, I think, already addressed this below also, but where there is somebody who is in some form of quarantine, awaiting diagnosis, but they are able to telework, that isn't going to count against their hours. So, and that person is working, they're just working differently than normal, but that's not going to count against their time out that they're allowed at this point. If they're going to be completely not working, that's when you'll start charging them for leave. And then Emily's question had a regular meeting, and then one member was participating via Zoom while she was driving, but didn't participate in votes and counted as an abstention. I think that's fair. That's a good way to record that she was present. She was present in the way she was participating, but she didn't participate in that vote. And I'll just throw in the reminder that an abstention is a no vote or a vote against whatever the motion was. So do keep that in mind. And if you have board members who are going to participate in that fashion, let them know ahead of time that they, if their votes are abstentions, those are no's, something they might want to know and might change whether they still decide to participate on, in that other means, or if they just want to be absent from the meeting overall.
Ashley, I don't know if you're seeing some of the other questions. We have one. If the board voted on an issue and two board members voted against the issue, do you have to name them in the board minutes, the two negative voters?
Generally, your minutes aren't going to reflect who voted in which way, but you need to, you'll be recording, just what the result was. But for the open meetings aspect, the public needs to be able to see that those individuals were the ones that voted against.
So if a board member calls an hour before the scheduled meeting and wants to Zoom into the meeting, does the clerk have to make that meeting available to the public via Zoom, even though only one board member is attending through Zoom?
Not necessarily. So up until recently, we most often heard about this in Harvest because we are Kansas, but we had people who participated in meetings through electronic means from combines, or you have a board member who's on a business trip. That person can participate remotely as long as the way they're participating is that the public who's present at the meeting can hear them and they can hear everything happening in the meeting room. So, it might be that there is a, cell phone on the table or a conference phone there to record everything in the room, or not record, sorry, to pick up everything in the room for that person, and their voice would then be broadcast to participate in votes. They would, verbally be voting through that means. So you don't necessarily need to open that up for everyone. But now that we do have this knowledge and experience using technology for our meetings, I think that there is a little bit more expectation, especially I think this has been really obvious in the last week or so, that in this bad weather, well, hey, you've put your meetings online for 9 months. Why can't you do it now when, everybody on the news is saying it's too dangerous to get out? One of the article I saw said one of the top 10 worst weather days anybody alive will ever see. So I think it's a good time to utilize those new methods that we've found in the last year. But just because one person's running late, you don't have to do that.
So thank you. I want to make sure you just answered this one. I want to make sure that a board member calls right before the meeting, says they're running late. Would best practice say that you should wait to start the meeting when you get that board member there, or can you start the board meeting right at 7 knowing that they're going to walk in 6 minutes later? Is best practice in that regard?
Yeah, I would still start your meeting as planned. That's what you've put out to the public. That's what the public is expecting. If that person is going to participate virtually or by phone for a certain amount of time, note that in the minutes. And then I would still also note that, Ashley Rollletter coming in late or coming in after her flat tire on the way to the meeting or whatever it is, arrived at 7:07 in person, and just make that note, just like you would if somebody was late generally.
Ashley, great advice. From what I think most board clerks are well aware that your minutes need to reflect the truth. So the board meeting was supposed to start at 7 and a board member walked in 6 minutes late. So that would be brought in. So thank you for that. So let's see, is there any other questions out there for Ashley or any of our audience out there? We appreciate Ashley coming in. We've put you in a bad spot, Ashley. We really appreciate that. You did a great job of answering some questions that were not topic related. So we do appreciate that.
Yeah, I
Any other
definitely appreciate the questions to help fill this 20 minutes. I was worried when I saw the agenda. So
well, let me ask one
Q&As.
let me ask one other question, and it was really part of Angie's that we didn't get a chance to go over. Angie did talk about that there needs to be a subject and a justification on an executive session motion. Could one of you please explain the difference between subject and justification?
I
One
can
that
do
knows
that.
this game.
Yeah, I was gonna say I can do that, Ashley. That was in my stuff. So the subject, so the justification, something has to fit neatly under one of those exceptions that the law allows. So personnel, for example, the subject has to give enough information without giving away, the whole thing. I mean, the whole point is we're going into executive session to protect privacy interests or something like that. So the subject at least needs to give enough of the flavor of what you're going to discuss to be transparent. So if we're having an executive session to discuss non-elected personnel, we probably want to say we're going to go in to discuss an individual staff member's performance under the non-exempt personnel justification. We're going to go return into the board meeting at 8:20 or whatever it is, so that you give all of those pieces. So that's kind of what it is. It's kind of an art to figure out what is enough information without giving all of the information. It's not, we're going to go evaluate Gary Sechrist and then we're going to come back out. We want to leave that blank, but we want to let them know kind of in general terms what they're going to be talking about.
Thank you so much for answering that. So Ashley, thank you for the time that you spent putting your video together. Please, once again, I hope you have an opportunity, if you have not reviewed that you take the time to look at that. The responses to your questions may make much more sense after watching the video. So with that, we've got Donna Whiteman, who will be joining us in a couple of minutes. So it's another little transition time. So if you need some time, please do. But we will be starting with Donna at 10:45. I'd like to introduce Donna Whiteman, who's General Counsel of KSB and of our legal department. And many of you know Donna. Donna's been here for a couple of years with KSB. So
Just a few.
and Donna's topic is very related. It seems to be everything happens to be a COVID or pandemic related, but she had policy issues related to the pandemic. So Donna, I'd like for you to give a brief outline of what your video included, and then hopefully we'll have some questions and we can go from there.
Well, thank you, Gary, and it's great to see all of your faces on the Zoom. We would rather see you in person, but this is as good as it's going to get until we all reopen up. I want to begin with what everybody's been through the last year, and my presentation will focus on any policy changes related to COVID. But in my presentation, I quoted Ralph Waldo Emerson, who basically said that bad times have a scientific value. So we know that we've been through some difficult times the last 12 months. Things are looking brighter, but he went on to say that these are occasions that good learners will not miss. And we certainly have been all good learners. We've been flexible. We've been positive on a daily basis. We've tried to solve problems to help students with their education. And school districts and school staff have done an outstanding job of supporting student learning in this experience. So we've all learned a lot, and we're all better than we used to be, and we're going to continue forward getting better each day with the opportunities that are presented. In my presentation that's online, I walk through the role of policy, and remember, policy has the force and effect of law. So once it's adopted, it becomes just as important as a statute. And remember, there are over 900 laws in Kansas statutes relating to how school districts operate. So our policies basically boil those laws down to the essentials. But remember, the purpose of your board policy is to give the public, students, employees, parents, and patrons sort of a guidebook of this is how we, the board, are going to operate. This is how our employees are going to operate. This is what the Kansas law requires. So whenever we get involved in any legal challenge, the first thing that happens when a parent or an employee hires an attorney, they will call our legal staff and ask for a copy of the board's policy. So it is very, very critical when boards adopt policies to make sure that the wording is narrow enough to address the law and the requirement, but flexible enough to allow your employees to make your difficult decisions on a daily basis related to students and staff. Then in the presentation online, I go through 10 of the most common legal questions that we have been handling in the last year related to COVID. And many of those policies are really available to you because in June of last year, June of 2018, we sent out a list of 51 board policies that were critical to review before school districts reopened in the fall. So the 10 most common legal questions are there along with those 51 policies. And then I highlighted 18 specifically which deal with operations, which are going to be in your E part of your handbook. I highlighted G, personnel. Everybody's been dealing with personnel issues every day. And then J, policies dealing with students and learning at the building level.
I'm putting every attorney on the spot, so I apologize. So
we love to be on the spot. We do our best when we're thinking on our feet.
Have there been any board policies that's been revised and updated during the past year? And I'm sure there has been. So I'm putting you on the spot to remember some of those. Can you give some examples of any that have been revised or changed during this past school year?
Remember, KASB provides you and your board with policy updates generally twice a year. We do June policy updates, and then we do December policy updates. And then in between, if anything needs to be tweaked, we're always available for discussion. But the big changes, particularly, let's start with December. And if I noticed that through phone calls, a number of boards are starting to adopt and review our December policy updates. So our December policy updates focused on a G, a personnel policy, and then a J policy. And the policy was on communicable diseases. We have always had a policy on excluding individuals who have a communicable disease. That's Kansas law. But we did update both the personnel and student policy to recognize that in deciding when to allow a student or staff members to come back, previously our policy said it was the medical note or the determination of the administration. We did add the county or local health officer to reflect the current law that if your local health officer releases a student or an employee to return, we're going to take that into consideration and allow them to return. We also updated, you've had a wellness policy for some time. In 2018, the Kansas State Board of Education adopted a health curriculum. In a sense, it was a recommended curriculum. And we thought, in addition to a wellness plan, we incorporated many of those suggestions in the recommended health curriculum. And what a better time to remind people of healthy habits. So that was added in our policy updates in December. We also did add into our emergency dismissal of school. We added health issues. That was BBD, evacuations and emergencies. So in addition to cold weather days and emergency closings, we can do it because of health or safety concerns. So if you didn't get those policy updates in December and you would like them, please feel free to contact me. We'd be happy to do it, or Leslie Garner, our paralegal. She can send those to you, and they are available also on our webpage.
Donnie, you just said something that raises a question for me. That you said the new policy that districts or boards have the opportunity to close schools due to emergency. Do you believe that gives them the opportunity to close school in spite of, let's say, county health department's recommendations?
Well, we certainly always want to follow the county health recommendations. Remember, under the statute, they have the authority when it comes to health-related issues. So we always want to follow their recommendations, and that way it gives our board and our employees the basically good faith immunity that they're following the law. They're making every attempt available to comply with the law. But the policy and the law related to issues related to the school building, that is under the authority of the Board of Education. There are about 5 statutes that basically say the board has the authority to manage, operate, control all of the buildings, and that would be by statutory language and then under home rule. But we always advise follow your local health department because they have the authority under the statute to make those decisions. While we've learned a lot about science and medicine, our lane is education, improving students' minds, all things academic and education. We rely upon the experts to make those decisions related to health because they have the authority and background and training to do so.
We have a question from a board clerk. Do you recommend that boards adopt the December updates now, or should they wait until July?
that really is done district by district. We send them out in December, but we know that January and February and March are very busy times for school boards. They're dealing with staff evaluations, issues relating to renewing contracts. So whenever you and the board president and the SOUP have time on the agenda, then it is important to get them adopted. But I have found that districts, because of the press of other business, and particularly now with COVID, that many will wait until March, April, May, and some do it in July. Others schedule policy reviews ongoing. So that is pretty much a local board decision. We do recommend, as a board training tool, it's important for our new board members to understand that we have to operate, we have to implement those 900 state laws as far as how school districts have to operate. So we recommend that if time is available on the monthly agenda, spend maybe 10, 15 minutes just walking the board through, particularly the student policies, the employee policies, so that they understand that part of the role of the board is to make sure that they are providing their employees with all those state and federal rights that they have. It really helps to provide guidelines and parameters that we boards make decisions based upon what the law requires.
Thank you so much for that. I think our clerks are well aware one of their jobs, it's not in print, is to protect their board. So So Donna, can boards of education require their employees to be inoculated?
That has been a frequent question. And what we recommend is that we educate, encourage, and model and provide a facility if you have it available, make it happen. But as far as legally requiring it, the answer is no, we do not recommend that. And Luke addressed a little bit of that this morning, whereas the EEOC, which applies to all employees in all private, public, basically said yes, but some of the specific language in the COVID legislation basically says no. So do everything you can. Everybody wants schools to be open. We want to see our students. We want to see you. So just encourage and facilitate helping people get vaccinated.
This is related. Can then boards require students to be inoculated? And I guess it goes with that, if they choose not to be inoculated, can they be kept from entering the school building or participating in school activities?
Remember, under Kansas law, we have a statute that basically requires students to be inoculated against contagious diseases. However, the Kansas Department of Health and Environment sets up that list. I did call over to them several months ago and ask if they were looking at adding COVID to their list of required inoculations. They basically said, absolutely not. With all the issues related to people wearing masks, we wouldn't want to even approach that. And there's another practical reason. None of the current inoculations are basically recommended for children under the age of 18 or 16. So I know some countries in the world are starting the trials on having them tested for students, but at this time, no. But again, if schools are to reopen, those basic requirements of washing hands, those health requirements, wearing masks, social distancing are proven ways to help schools reopen.
We do have a question, Donna. Does the board need to have a waiver if a student or staff refuse the vaccine?
No, I think I would rely upon, again, your educating and encouraging them. And as long as you are following the guidelines, and really it's going to be in section E of your policy manual about building maintenance, cleaning, the social distancing, the mask wearing, the hand washing. All of those will help, but you do not need a waiver to protect you. As long as you're following the current guidance of your local health department and making sure that you are providing that environment that helps to prevent the disease from spreading, you will be fine. Now, we cannot control, of course, what our employees and students do in the evenings and on weekends, but we can create a safe environment. And there has been very little transmission, I think the data has shown, from the actual school environment. So we always say the safest place for students is in school. So following those precautions will protect everyone from any potential liability.
Let me change gears on you a little bit. As it relates to remote learning, hybrid, the different learning environments, have you been aware, or has KSB made any recommendations on policy that pertain to attendance?
Right. Remember, even though we are using a variety of instructional methods, some in person, some remotely, some hybrid, the policies and laws requiring attendance are still in force. The policies requiring record keeping, they're still in force. The policies requiring reporting truancies are still in force. So nothing has changed except for how we are delivering those education services. So those policies are still in force and effect. Particularly, I would encourage everyone to look at your I section of your board policy. There are about 8 policies that deal with instruction, providing instruction, allowing makeup opportunities. We certainly want to and do on a daily basis focus on curriculum and instruction. I think what the last year has shown us is that we have to be flexible in our delivery system and have been providing every opportunity for students to learn and be successful. But I think as moving forward, schools are going to be looking at summer school, maybe tutoring, which is all addressed in policies, before school and after school, additional time. So as we move forward, we're going and are daily targeting those who may be lagging behind. Maybe they were lagging behind before COVID, but now there have been other issues. So I think moving forward, we're going to be targeting student achievement more and all those makeup opportunities, because our business is education on a daily basis. So we want to do everything and anything possible to make sure our students are achieving those Gannon student achievement guidelines or goals.
All right, maybe our clerks are not aware of this, but in August, our federal Department of Aid made some changes in Title IX requirements. Could you maybe explain those and how those may impact boards of education?
Certainly. The big change last year, unfortunately, they snuck it in as we were trying to reopen schools, but the U.S. Department of Education on August 14th implemented new Title IX regulations dealing with investigation and handling sexual harassment. Now, the Title IX regs apply to both K-12 and colleges. Their goal, it appears, was to address what's happening on college campuses. But
well, it looks like we had a battery issue in the KSB conference room. So hopefully Donna will come back, and I don't know if Ted's going to use that, but man, if there's any attorney on that might be able to conclude that response, it would sure be appreciated.
Right. So Gary, this is Angie. sorry, I was emailing at the time too, so I might have missed part of it. But yeah, so we were given notice in May that there were going to be Title IX regulations that would come on board and be effective August 14th. So main aspects of that is that it doesn't change much with regard to, oh, Donna's back on. So I'm going to turn it back over to Donna. Sorry.
Thank you, Angie. It's a good handoff there. We're really good. We're getting very, very adept. We're learning. These Title IX changes made major changes in how we investigate and determine whether sexual harassment has occurred at the building or district level. There's new definitions, new requirements for the Title IX coordinator, who can investigate, who can decide the appeal process. So major changes. I would encourage everyone to read the policy changes that we sent out in June. And if you have any questions whatsoever as you encounter this, please feel free to call any of us at KSB. We can help you through this process because it is much more procedural and much more like a criminal investigation than it used to be. We used to take prompt, appropriate, immediate action to make sure it stopped. Students learned from it and moved on. Now there are many procedural rights and responsibilities in that. So give us a call and we'll be happy to help.
Well, I'd like to thank you once again for your time. Very informative. Thank you for the video, the efforts you put into that. Group, if you haven't had the chance to watch Donna's, as I would say for all of our presenters, please take the time to look through that. So Donna, thank you so much. We are going to have a quick transition time, and then we're going to go with Ted Carter, our Chief Data Officer. So we'll see you at 11:10 for our next presentation.
Thank you very much.
Hello, Ted. Good to see you.
Morning, Gary.
I'd like to introduce Ted Carter, who is our Chief Data Officer. And I always like to try to get Ted in front of clerks. This is just strictly my opinion. I think it's a very underutilized resource that we provide for you and your boards of education. So Ted, we'd hopefully you had an opportunity to watch Ted's video, but Ted, would you give a brief overview? And then obviously we would love to have some questions from our audience.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the video that that we posted for this section, the first part is actually from a lunch and learn that we did a while back, largely with board members and other leadership folks, to talk about where to find the resources on the KSB website member portal. That includes all the annual surveys that we do, and then some resources from KSD and some others. So that's the first part of the video. The second part of the video, we talk a little bit more about how to supply that, how to provide that data, how board clerks or data stewards at your district can provide that data. So I do encourage you to go look at that video. We'll do a little screen sharing here in a little bit and show some of the things if we don't have a lot of questions. But Gary, I was thinking it might make some sense to talk a little bit about the philosophy that we use for our data, because it's a little bit different. You all know me because I'm the guy who sends out something every few weeks saying, hey, please send your surveys. And so I frequently will get responses back with strong apologies saying, I'm sorry, we haven't got that data to you yet. Please don't be mad, you know. And so I want to say we are not the State Department of Ed. So the way that we deal with data is very different. The reason that we collect this data is collected from you for you. The main purpose of the data that we collect is to share among districts. So our philosophy on that data is a little different. We don't expect it to be perfect and we don't expect it to be immediate. We want you to get the data to us as soon as you can because we want to make sure that you can share it with your fellow districts. But we understand there's a lot of things going on, not just this year. I mean, every year when you have new clerks and when there are big things happening with your boards, it's not always easy to get the data to us, and we completely understand that. The other big difference between what we do and what the state does is we consider our data to be kind of a living data set. And what I mean by that is we don't have a set deadline where, submit it by October 1st and then it's locked down and you can't touch it again. We really treat the data more as a living thing. So we encourage you to submit as much information as you have early on, and then you can always come back in later and you can update it or complete it. One of the things we started this year is we have something where you can verify a survey. And so you can submit data to us, but not check a little box at the end that says verified by district. That tells us that you're still working on the data. You're still trying to get it to us. You're trying to get it completed. And not until you check that box that says verified will we expect the data to be as good as it's going to get, if that makes sense. Please feel free to ask questions as we go through here. Before I get too much further in, also, Angie, I wanted to ask you, I've seen on the chat that a lot of people are asking for resources, and I'm assuming that what you would be providing would be covered under the handbooks on the portal. Is that correct?
Well, that's a good question. I didn't even send them to the portal, but I should have. So yeah, there are some resources available under the member portal. So I'll let Ted will probably fill you in on that more. What I sent at this point was our policy and our forms having to do with this in a little blurb of an explanation. But yes, there are more resources for you on our website under the member portal, LAF handbooks and things like that. So thank you.
Okay, good deal. Yeah, so we'll jump on the portal here in just a second and show you where the data resources that I'm talking about are, and also where you can find some of those legal resources. So any questions? It's always hard to tell where to put the data in workshops like this. Do you do it early and scare people off, or do you do it later when people are getting a little tired? And so we know it's not exciting, but let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will show what we're looking at here.
Ted, I know you're getting ready to do this, but one of the first questions is and I'm sure you're going to explain this, is how do these clerks even know what data is available for them to observe?
That is an excellent question. Okay, so are you all seeing my screen that says welcome to the Clerks Workshop?
Yes.
Okay, good deal. So first of all, this is the landing page for today's workshop. So for those of you that haven't spent a lot of time out here, I wanted to show you real quick. You've got our agenda, but then also right down here is that on-demand video library. So we're talking about this data survey one, but all these videos are here. So I encourage you, if you have not had a chance yet to watch these, please spend some time with them because there's really good content in here. Also, the one for this session, the data survey, this would be one that you might even want to share parts of with your board. So at a board meeting, even showing them where those resources are, if you've got some board members who are really interested in digging into data and really comparing, you can definitely jump in there and look at that. So now where I'm going to take you is our main portal page, which is it's kasb.envisams.com, and I'll put that in the chat when we're done so you can see that. You can also get to our member portal if you go to our website. Right up there in the upper right hand corner, you've got a link to go to the member portal. So for those of you that haven't been into the member portal yet, I will tell you that all the clerks definitely have a login for the system. All of your board members should also. The way you get into the portal is using the email that you get where you get your KSB emails. So the news briefs and all of those, that email address you would use to log in. If you don't know your password, I encourage you to use this forgotten password link. And what that will do is it will send you an email that you can use to then reset your password. If those don't work, then you can email either pinpoint@kasb.org or myself, tcarter@kasb.org, and we'll help you figure that out. So I'm going to log into our portal using a test login account here. So this, as board clerks, this is what you should see when you log in. You see a lot of stuff on the main page here, but I'm going to take you straight to this menu that says Member Resources. If you click on that, you're going to see a whole bunch of things. And before we get into looking at the data, let me show you, and Angie, feel free to jump in here too. There's a section on KSB handbooks. And when you go in there, you're going to get several handbooks that I encourage you as clerks to spend some time with. There's one on board leadership. There's one that's just called Clerk's Handbook, a forms book, and then a guide to boardsmanship. Here's the COMA and the CORA references right there. And then there's also a brochure for CORA, and then a site council handbook. So lots of really good resources there that you probably want to spend some time with. The other one, if you are a member of the Legal Assistance Fund, which unfortunately I don't have that set up on here, there are some handbooks that are specific for legal assistance. And Angie, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you remember what those are?
Hold on, Ted. Talk amongst yourselves. I will pull it on mine.
We can come back to it, or I can look. Yeah, I can
But I
log in
know
with
we'll have the school law handbook, which is a great resource. We have, trying to think some of the other ones. I think we have a 504 handbook. If you keep talking, I will interject here shortly.
Well, all right, I can log in with a different account when I'm done and show you what else is in there. But definitely spend some time with those. But for the data, for the district level data, for the surveys that we're talking about, you would go to the top item here that says district level data. And that takes you to this page here that shows you that in general, we have three kinds of data resources. The first one is an actual page on the portal that shows you forms. And for any of you that have already submitted data or are working on submitted data, if you've spent some time with those forms, that's how you get the data to us mainly. I will tell you that there are three surveys, the staff info, the supplemental, and the fees survey, which are a little complicated to fill out online. So another option we do have for you is we can send you Excel files that have the data that you provided to us last year that you can then update and then send back to me, and I'll get them onto the portal. There's been a little bit of confusion on that. There are places to download Excel files from the website, but those are not what you want to use if you want to update and send data to us. If you want that option, just email me and let me know, and I will send you the files to use. I think for next year, we're going to go ahead and automatically provide those to everybody at the beginning of the year for those more complicated surveys. The other part you will see is this download icon, which is for Excel files. The video really goes into these Excel files. We've set these up to try to make them really easy to use, to compare your district to other districts that are similar in a variety of different ways. And jump in here if you guys have questions. I need to open up my window so I can see the chat. Gary, is there anything? I'm not seeing the chat right now, so are there questions to answer?
Ted, since you gave me an opening, I'm going to jump in here. I'm on the KSB LAF handbooks portion. So we have Fair Labor Standards Act there, Negotiations Handbook, Religion in Kansas Public Schools, school district organizational handbooks. That would be like transfer of property consolidation. There's a school law basics. That's kind of a Cliff's Notes version of a school law topics. School law handbook, which I find really helpful on an assortment of topics. There's a school law index that lists most of the statutes that are implicated by different things that districts do. A Section 504 handbook, sexual harassment and bullying handbook, and a student discipline one. So that's what we have.
Perfect. Perfect.
Well, Ted, show us some of the information that is available to the clerks, the board members, superintendents.
Absolutely,
So
absolutely. So there's the LAF handbooks that Angie was just talking about. There's quite a few on there. All right, so looking at the district data, the third piece, excuse me, the third piece on here is interactive tools. So we have both Tableau and Power BI online interactive tools. So if you've got some real data nerds in your district, they may want to play with these. We won't spend any time today playing with those, but those are a way to interact with the data on screen and get some interesting charts and graphs. So if I scroll down, I'm seeing a list of KSB surveys. And the main surveys that we deal with are calendar, district policies, elections, fees, staff, and supplemental, as I mentioned earlier, teacher info, and then we have one that's called teacher salary schedules, which is not really a survey. What we ask is that you just email us your salary schedules each year, and we will enter that data. I'm going to go ahead and show you, we don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to show you an Excel file real quick. The one I will show you is the staff info, which is the one that is the most popular these days. So if I click that download button, I'm going to get the Excel file. And this Excel file has basically all of the salary and HR kind of data that we collect other than teacher info. Is everyone seeing my Excel file on screen?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So most of the Excel files are set up this way. They have two tabs. The first one is a comparison tab, and the second tab actually has all the raw data in it. On the first tab, we try to provide as much as we can to let you compare. So let's say that I am from district, I'm going to pick 270. I'm going to try to pick 270. It does not want to respond today. Okay, we'll stick with 101 for now. Sometimes Excel is a little slow. So right here, I'm able to see District 101, their data. I can look at a variety of different positions. We're looking at superintendents right now, but you will see that there are quite a few different positions that I can look at here. I can also, I mentioned that verified by district earlier. I can choose to look at all of the data that's currently in our system, or I can look at just the data that's been checked off as finalized. I can also pick a different school year. I could go back and look at the past couple of school years. But then I get to see a comparison. So for example, I'm looking at superintendent salaries. I get to see my district's numbers, and then I get to see all of these, excuse me, all of these comparison groups. First one is comparing by enrollment. So I can say that my district is paying my superintendent better than most districts about my size. I can continue on and I can see by region of the state, by your KNEA UniServe, high school league, CASA class, and then the state as a whole. And then we've color highlighted these. So I can see right across the board that this district is paying better than all of its comparison groups. But then when I look at my fringe benefits, I see, because these are in red, that I'm actually not doing quite as well. So this is something that your board members might find really useful. I'm going to try to switch again and see if it's going to be difficult with me again. Yeah, this one doesn't want to play. I think it's because we're on Zoom. So that gives you a quick view of a comparison. You'll see here that there are a lot of different elements that could have been provided by the district. This particular district did not provide a lot of these, either because they didn't have them. They may still be in progress on this. They may be waiting to submit some of this data for later. And that is one of the other really good points with a lot of these data sets. We expect you to provide as much data as you can within reason. The second tab on this Excel file and on most of them is just a big giant table that you can do some filtering. So I can say I only want to look at a particular school year. I only want to look at particular districts and really filter that down. There is some data on the second tab that doesn't show up in the front. It's harder to do comparisons with yes, no's and some of those fields. But there's as you can see, quite a bit of data. This is one of our bigger data files. So there's a lot of data in there to play with.
Ted, I'm making an assumption that I know the clerks have already figured out that this would be great information. Teacher data would be great information during negotiations for boards of education.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, I'm glad you mentioned that, because if you look towards the bottom of the list, there's a file called Info for Negotiations. And this is a file that we've put together with help from our legal team that really focuses on the data that's most often used for negotiations. So that's a good one to take a look at for sure. Then the other one right here is the superintendent search tool, which is similar. We work with our leadership team to really figure out which data elements are the most useful for our superintendent searches or for executive searches. So I don't want to dig too much further into the weeds here. I do encourage you to take a look at that video. I will also tell you that on our portal, there's a tutorials page. And if you go in there, you're going to find several user manuals, generally working with the portal, but also working specifically with KSB data and how to submit the data, how to update all of that. So I encourage you, if you're still working on your surveys or you haven't started yet, don't feel bad. We're all kind of in that boat this year. So please feel free to reach out to me and I will help you through figuring those out. If you're interested in getting some of those Excel files, let me know. And above all else, if you have recommendations for things that will make things easier, different questions to ask, so on, please feel free to provide that to us.
Ted, give the clerks, if you can, if a school board is discussing and they're saying, boy, we would like to have some information for this, or maybe we don't even know where we can find that information. Maybe we want to do enrollment trends, anything like that. Ted, can they call you to say, we've got that information, or golly, we don't, we can come up with it, or we can help you with that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. We do. And actually, I'm glad you mentioned enrollment data, because that is something that's pretty popular these days too. KSB does a 5-year enrollment projection, and we provide that to all districts for free. It's not as fancy as some you might get and pay a lot of money for, but it is a pretty good estimation of where your district's going to be for the next 5 years or so. So that one is on the section that says other district data. It's at the top of the list there, and it's got a similar Excel file. But yeah, to your question specifically, Gary, please feel free to ask me questions. Most of the time when people reach out, we do have the data or know how to find the data that you're looking for. It's not very often that I get a gotcha question that I say, no, we don't collect that. The exception has been this year with people asking what formats the school districts are using currently. That's kind of the holy grail of data this year that nobody has. So, but in general, if you're looking for it, we can probably find it for you.
Well, we do have a question, and I think it's from one of our staff members, unless there's somebody with the same name. But is there a quick way for a clerk to check what surveys they've completed, or maybe the ones they need to complete?
Excellent question. Top of this list on KSB surveys is something called the survey checklist. And if I open that up, I get to see a checklist right here. And if I pick a district, well, we have better luck here. This is going to tell you true, false, whether you've submitted them. So whether they've been verified. So that's a pretty quick way to look and say and find out if your district has submitted everything or not.
So that true means it's been completed, and false would mean that it has not been completed?
That is correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep, so that's a very quick way to look. I will also point out that anything you interact with on screen on the portal is updated fairly automatically. So as soon as you submit something, this data should change within an hour or so. The Excel files, that is not the case. The Excel files have to be manually updated. I try to do that every 2 weeks, unless I get a lot of data coming in, and then I'll do it more frequently, or if I have a specific request from somebody. So that's something to keep in mind. If you submit something to us on Monday, and you jump in there to download the Excel file on Wednesday, it may not be updated yet. So you can shoot me an email and say, hey, I'd like that. I just submitted my data and like to see it in Excel, and I'll try to do a quick update for you.
Well, Luke from USD 502, I apologize for thinking that you were Luke Soba. Thank you for clarifying that. So Ted, we've got 1 more minute, and is there anything else that you would like this group? Let me ask you a question. Will there be an evaluation of this particular, for example, of our clerks workshop today? Is there an evaluation that we would hope that would be available to these individuals?
Absolutely. So back on that clerks page that has the agenda and the videos, I believe we have a link on here. Yep, right here. It says, encourage you to take the event survey here, right under the section for on-demand video library. So you just need to click that and it will take you to a SurveyMonkey survey to fill out for today's workshop and for the on-demand content.
Good. Thank you so much. And we do hope that you will utilize this information. As you can imagine, his department spends a lot of time on this, as do you, by inputting this. So we do appreciate that. The information is really important to other people. And I know that sometimes until you need it, you don't see the importance. But I would encourage you to go through there and help everybody out around the state by having your information as up to date as you possibly can. So Ted, thank you. Our last session will be in a few minutes, and it will be our advocacy department, Leah Fleiter and Mark Tallman. So we are going to go into one of our little time that we can take a comfort break or get yourself a glass of iced tea or coffee, probably more likely. So we'll see you in about 5 minutes. Well, it looks like we are back. Thank you. We have our last little stretch here. Have been waiting for Leah Fleiter, who is our advocacy director, and I think we're going to have Mark Tallman with us, who is the associate executive director, and they're going to spend some time with you, visiting with you about legislative issues. So I'll open it up to Leah and or Mark to start us off.
Thanks, Gary. It's great to see all of you here this morning. I appreciate you tuning in, even if you're sort of required to. Active audience. I put a link in the chat just now, and that's a link to new bills introduced. That's on our website today, and we just posted it today. And that's just an example of information that we post almost every day with all the new bills that have been introduced in the Kansas legislature thus far in the 2021 session. I'll tell you, we're either very popular or we're very unpopular. I think it probably depends on who you talk to, and perhaps we can be glad maybe that we're not the Department of Labor. But other than that, we, other than the Department of Labor, our K-12 public schools seem to be the focus of quite a bit of attention from the legislature this year. Whether it's questions about federal COVID funding and whether that can be used to provide some of the mental health services that school boards want to do, or if it's about whether people should have to belong to a teachers union, or we have a large number of bills that do some varying, they sort of are variations on a theme of giving public money to private schools. A parent or a guardian might be able to have a scholarship or use other monetary means to take a student out of a public school and send them to a private school instead. And we also, in fact, just saw something today. We have a bill that would, let's see, I think it's at the end of the next fiscal year, lapse $100 million from KSDE's budget and authorize all of you to spend down your unencumbered balances. So there's just almost too much to talk about. So I thought I would throw it open to questions from you, and also, let's see, Coke and treats. I would love to get in on that conversation as well. But I imagine many of you have issues that you're hearing about in your districts or with your board. And so I wanted to kind of turn it over to you first and see if there's anything that you heard about, on the radio on your way into work, or, what you hear as you're out and about in the grocery store. We also had a bill that was introduced just the other day saying that all public schools shall be offering an in-person learning opportunity as of March 26th of this year. So just, a few weeks from now, everybody in-person learning. I think all of you probably know that many, if not most of our students are already in our classrooms most of the time, but there's a few districts that have not been able to because of some local requirements. And as you probably know, remote and or hybrid learning has been somewhat unpopular with parents, with school board members, with legislators. None of us have enjoyed how this school year has played out, but we're working our way through it. And unfortunately, there's just been quite a lot of, I would say, angst about how we're responding to the pandemic and whether kids are in the classroom being taught, that kind of thing. So I see that Tracy said she hadn't heard about the unencumbered balance bill. Yeah, we hadn't either until just a little bit ago. So I'm going to bring that up. And I might let Mark also weigh in on that if he's had a chance to look at it.
And Mark, there's also a question right above that. It just simply is, which bill is about spending down?
Yes, it's 2382, I believe. Yeah, I'm pulling it up.
Okay, Sarah has put in it is 2382.
Yes, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so on July 1 of 2021, so this coming year, or for the fiscal year, for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2022, the legislature would lapse $100 million from KSDE's appropriations. And then it says, notwithstanding any other provisions of state law, blah, blah, blah. During the fiscal year ending June 30, 2022, a school district may expend any monies that are unencumbered cash balances of the school district. So Mark, you want to talk about what we think might be behind a bill like this?
Well, what's behind it is just a lot of legislators and other organizations being critical about what they say are excessive cash balances. You may know that just this year there was a legislative post audit which looked at it and basically didn't find any problems, but they basically said, we really can't identify whether there are problems because there's no legislative or state board direction about what balances should be. So typically you would go in and say, the recommendation is to do this and it's not being done. What they did note, and we have probably talked with some of you about this before, is there is guidance from I think it's the Governmental Finance Officers Association of a certain level of balances in operating funds. And what they basically found is of the districts they sampled, about half were above that and half were below that. So overall, balances appear to be fairly, not inconsistent with that direction. But I would say you guys are all over the place. Some of you are well above that, and some of you are what some people might say dangerously below that. So the idea here is to identify another perhaps popular need. In this case, I think it's what this would spend $100 million more for health issues. I think individuals with disabilities. And then they would take that out of school aid. My very quick reading of the bill did not say how they would do it. So whether that would in effect be a base budget reduction for everybody, or whether it would somehow be able, or they would attempt to appropriate, but to apportion it some way to say, well, if your district has high balances in this area, you would have to spend. None of that is explained in the bill. I think the key thing to keep in mind, two things. Number one, as we always say, what is your policy on why you have the balances that you do? Because one of the things the audit found is the districts they went and talked to, most of them didn't really have a written policy. They could say, well, this is kind of our guide, or this is why we did it, but they don't have anything to point to say our board believes we should have this level of balances in our general fund, or this level of contingency reserve, or so lacking that, it's very easy for someone to say, well, it's too high or too low. But so the point is, number one, there isn't really agreed upon what the problem is. But number two, if this was done, remember, let's play this out. We would be spending $100 million more in one area. We'd be cutting schools $100 million more 1 year, and you would have to spend down those balances. Now, the question then for the legislature is, would they replace that $100 million the next year to fully fund the school finance formula, in which case they've had a 1 year kind of savings that you had to draw down balances to do this other thing. But then the next year, they're not going to have $100 million to spend on this other program. So it's really important to help people think through what happens if you spend one-time money for balances. So I see, is there a policy example? So what you're looking is something that you could look at to use. I'm not aware of it. I don't know whether we have any of our policy people on here. I just know that was something that was raised in the audit, was saying they did not see that. So I don't know what other staff we might have on place that could respond to that. But Sandy, I guess I don't know the answer to whether there's an example out there that could be used, if I'm understanding your question correctly.
Let me raise a question for either one or both of you. The voucher bill, for lack of a better term. If I'm a school board that happens to have a private school within my community, how might that affect the public school?
Well, Gary, it would allow the bill that seems to be getting the most traction right now expands a current program. The current program says that if you are a child who qualifies for free lunch and you attend one of the what's called 100 lowest performing elementary schools in the state, and that's not a necessarily a criticism. That's just, you know, ranking by test scores, you know, by achievement rates as provided by KSDE. If you attend one of those 100 lowest performing schools and you're a free lunch child, you can get a scholarship to attend a private school. The bill that is being the most discussed right now would broaden that program to include also children who are on reduced lunch status. So, you know, a much larger group of kids. And I think especially in this environment when folks have either maybe lost their jobs or had their hours cut back because of COVID, you know, you might have a much larger pool of eligible students. And it would expand it from just the kids attending the 100 lowest elementary schools to free or reduced lunch students attending any school in Kansas, elementary, middle, or high school. So really, you know, expands that universe of kids who be able to leave your school and attend a private school.
What it doesn't change at this stage is the state cap on how many dollars
Correct.
can be provided, but we're well below that cap. In other words, the credits awarded for the contributions made are well below that $10 million. So there's some theory that if more students were eligible, maybe there'd be more contributions, and if there were more contributions, it might draw down more tax dollars. But one of the things we don't know, and I mean, if you want to put in the chat your guess, that's so hard to say about this, is how many kids do you think are only attending your school because they can't afford to go somewhere else? If most kids are satisfied or happy or wouldn't be accepted or whatever the term is, probably okay. If there's a significant number, and what might that be? 1%, 5%, 10%? We don't know. And so a big question is simply, if this happened, how many students would want to take advantage of this, and why? Those are some things we might want to think about. But whereas this now is limited to a very small number of schools and districts, as Leah said, if amended, the bill would basically make every district in the state potentially affected. Now, again, there'd have to be a qualified private school where a child could go to, but every district could be affected.
With the voucher programs, your understanding, would it be the base state aid per pupil, or would it be the weight teams that are associated with that student that would like to attend?
It would be an $8,000 scholarship.
Maximum, depending on contributions. That you may be thinking, Gary, there's another bill which came out of committee, but is not quite on the fast track yet, that would allow parents to basically take their base state amount into a savings account, is the way it's phrased, or an education account that could be used. The district would keep the weightings for up to 3 years, but that family every year then would get the base state aid amount that they could use for tuition or other expenses. But those are two different approaches. The current bill is scholarships funded with the help of tax credits, but depending on private contributions. So it's kind of laundered, if you want to look at it that way. The other bill, the education savings account, would be direct state appropriations into those accounts.
I think what's important to really realize, Gary and everybody, is that I think some of these types of bills would have been introduced anyway this session because the United States Supreme Court made a ruling over the summer that said that that current program that we have with the scholarships is constitutional. So I think there might have been something like that introduced anyway, but I think there's this opportunity is being seized, I would say, by people who are they were already critical of public education for whatever reason, and now because of discontent with remote learning, the mean governor made us close our schools, remote learning, hybrid learning. We're not all playing football. We're not all playing volleyball or basketball. They're kind of seizing on this discontent to say, you know, see, our local schools, they're not listening to you parents. They don't really care about you. And so let's just give kids money to go to a private school. So, you know, Mark is right. You have to think about how many of your kids would currently be flocking to private schools. Maybe not so many, depending on where you live or where you work. But it's something that is part of a narrative of this continuing kind of attack on public schools that we've seen over the past several years. And it's just kind of an additional avenue there to say, hey, you know, public schools aren't doing the job. Your local schools aren't doing the job. And we need to give folks an alternative.
To loop back, that bill number, as Sarah put in, is 2382.
That's the balances bill. That's correct.
And
the question for the group, yeah.
Reading this question for the first time, so maybe it's been answered. Do any districts in the meeting today have a policy in place for their cash balances? We don't have that, we don't believe, but if there are districts out there, you could share those. This particular district has more of a practice for certain funds, but not a broad policy. So, and they couldn't find that particular number.
You know what? I'm putting a link in the chat here in just a moment.
Question from Joan for one of you. Is there a way for the government to get their foot in the door to start regulating what private schools teach? And I'm assuming that goes if the voucher system would pass.
Well, you know, I think their main enforcement mechanism is through accreditation, and many of the religious private schools in the state, you know, the Catholic schools, the Lutheran schools, they are accredited and by KSDE, and many of them, some of them even participate in the same KISA accreditation program that you all participate in. It's the other sort of, you know, Leah's private school that just kind of gets started because I see an opportunity to get some scholarship money for kids that could be a problem.
Thank you for your response in there about those policies. I think that helps. I'm going to ask you another question that, and I'm not even sure. Go ahead, Mark.
Before you do that, would just note the reason that bill talks about aging. Yeah, keep reading.
Yeah, keep scrolling. Go down to the second paragraph.
Yeah, and you've got to. It's a long title and a short bill, but the part balances are at the end. Are at the end of it.
Yeah, way to sneak it in there. We feel you, Tracy.
This may not be anything that affects the clerks, except it will affect the boards, I'm assuming. I've heard that there is at least some traction. I don't know anything formally on gender identity, on whether boys and girls can compete in activities based upon their gender preference or the gender of which they were born. Is there anything out there that you can speak to in that regard?
Yeah, it's the Senate bill is Senate Bill 208. And we actually, Mark did a nice summary of it in that link that I shared as I came on. And it says that, you know, if you have a girls golf team, then only biological girls can participate on that team. And I might throw that over to our legal eagles for more commentary on that. And Mark, did you want to add anything?
Only to say that it was really Donna Whiteman who heavily annotated anything.
That's right.
Who could probably speak more to the legal pitfalls.
Can I jump in here, Mark?
Of course.
I think the bill is written, wouldn't comply with Title IX. Remember that we cannot discriminate based upon sex. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court has addressed that issue with employees, saying sex is sex, and you can discriminate against employees if they're transgender or whatever their sex is. So, but it hasn't been decided by the U.S. Supreme Court on Title IX. However, it's anticipated that the new administration will deal with this issue of Title IX and its application to transgender students. So this bill is, even if it passed, I think it would be challenged. It would be, we're always reminding school districts that, do you want to be the test case in Kansas? And this may be the bill that would be the test case that would be challenged if it gets passed.
If you have an interest, I have just found out that
Yeah.
it has been scheduled for a hearing Tuesday at 1:30 p.m. in the Senate Education Committee.
Right.
So we'll be preparing our comments on this, and would welcome if you have an interest or thoughts. I guess my only, I don't want to say rebuttal to Donna, is that I guess this issue is likely to be challenged either way,
Right.
until or unless the Supreme Court actually rules on it, which they haven't done to this point. So I think the understanding is this bill was introduced in response to the Biden administration's changes of the Trump administration's changes to the Obama administration's policy in these areas. So.
Well, we're getting up on our time, Lee and Mark, and I want to make sure if there's anything else that you think pertinent for our clerks learning, this is a great time for you to get that last bit of information out.
Well, I guess I would just say if you or your board members or your superintendent are like us and you nerd out on this kind of thing and you really like to follow this, whether it's voucher bills or unencumbered balances, we do have a number of resources available to you. And I would assume that most of you get our news briefs and our news emails, but that is a good way to get that information. We also, if you scroll down towards the bottom of our new website, we have YouTube videos that we post every night. Mark and I and our communications editor, Scott Rothschild, who also covers the legislature, we give you a quick, less than 10-minute update every night on all the fun things that have happened that previous day. And then, as you may know, we also do a Zoom every Friday at noon that's recorded, and you can watch later in case you don't want to spend your lunch hour listening to stuff like this. That also updates you on kind of what has happened in the past week and what we're looking at in the future. Mark, did you want to add anything?
Nope. Thank you very much. Please watch.
Well, thank you, folks. I'd really like to, my heartfelt thank you to our presenters, those that have created the videos, and Dr. Nienswander and Lee and Mark for joining us live. Thank you for providing this information to our clerks. We definitely hope it's been beneficial to you. We know it's different, but we hope it is something that you feel like that you have got the information that you need. I would like to thank our member engagement team, which is Austin Harris, Leah Coons, Alec Madrigal, Rachel Thomas, and our leadership and advocacy coordinator, Lauren Lynch, who've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes to make the technology work. So I would say that was a success. So thank you. KSB strives to create a culture of communication and service, and we really hope that this particular workshop was aligned with our mission to create that communication and service. So with that, I want to thank you for your time, and we will call this meeting concluded. Thank you.
Bye. Good job, Gary.